let's get one thing straight about this Chinese spy balloon over America. First, the idea that the Biden administration is blaming the Trump administration for allowing 3 of these balloons to sail over America and never even notice is asinine. Now, there is some truth that these balloons are not as easily picked up on radar because of their shape. You know, we know with stealth technology, planes try to limit right angles in order to prevent the radar waves from bouncing back. A circular balloon actually helps in minimizing that. Still, passive band radar would have no problem picking up that damn balloon. And more than that, the balloon is massive. It's the size of, they say, 3 buses. I mean, there are people all over America picking this out of the sky before the U.S. government ever decided to notify anybody about it. I mean, they claim they knew, but did they know? And this idea that they did nothing about it because they didn't want to interrupt Secretary Blinken's visit with the Chinese is also asinine. So now that this thing sailed over the U.S., we have certain interests on one side pushing for what seems like a U.S.-China war. But on the other hand, it seems like the Biden administration had some interest in letting it sail across the U.S. The concept that Montana is too densely populated to shoot down a balloon is idiotic. We know most of the population of Montana is in the West. But more than that, the balloon sailed across the Pacific Ocean, over the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, down through Canada, and into the United States. It should have never gotten that far, and there's no excuse for it. And it seems quite possibly that the special interests in the U.S. who want a war to start or who want to make relations with China worse are pushing for this. And this isn't brinksmanship. This is just asinine. And our government can't even get its act together enough to agree on what happened here. You have Trump officials refuting the claim that this balloon ever passed over the U.S. And we will say there's been, 3 prominent Trump officials saying this. Mike Pompeo, Secretary Esper, and John Radcliffe. Now, compare the weight of those 3 against some unnamed government source and the Biden administration saying, oh, this happened 3 times. It's ridiculous. But more than that, now on the other hand, we have to weigh all these neoliberal and neocon activists itching for war. The point is this balloon should have never crossed over the U.S. This is another massive, massive diplomatic failure, intelligence failure, and homeland security failure. And there is absolutely no excuse for it. So that said, let's just get that out of the way. And the fact that, I've seen some channels and some pundits celebrating the fact that, our F-22 fighter jet was able to shoot down a balloon. Okay, this isn't some joyous occasion. This isn't some incredible feat of military acumen and performance. This is rather silly. It should have never gotten this far, and we never needed a warplane worth hundreds of millions of dollars to shoot the damn thing down to begin with. So let's get out of that way. Let's get that out of the way before we start talking about the media narrative in general. So the big story seems to be the big China balloon. And if there's anything more symbolic of the clown world we're currently living in, is the fact that a giant silly balloon A giant silly balloon is going to cause World War III. You know, there were wise analysts who last year predicted the deep state would turn its focus to China and war, following failure and embarrassment in Ukraine and the pullout in Afghanistan. And they were spot on. You know, there's more to this story than we are being told, and the narrative is shockingly juvenile and one big red herring. It smells like every deep state media campaign designed to spur the people to indignation, rage, and unwarranted war. I mean, we all remember Vietnam. We remember the narrative behind Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. Now, on one hand, there's no excuse for allowing that damn balloon to cross the U.S. On the other hand, there's no reality where intelligence gathering in the 21st century is a provocation for war. Our leaders are hapless fools who care nothing for this country or its people. Instead, they care about posturing, they care about narratives, and they care about perceptions. Our leaders are hapless fools. Our State Department policy for decades has been the one China policy, with Beijing as the only government for this one China, not Taipei. Now, maybe we should change that policy, written on the State Department website, before we start a war over Taiwan. Maybe we should stop our own espionage and intel gathering if it's so provocative. Maybe we shouldn't have U.S. soldiers in Taiwan since we don't appreciate undercover Chinese police forces in the U.S. Maybe we shouldn't have just thrown cash and tech at China like morons, so impressed with our own dominance while China pursued its interests in foreign policy. I mean, we had this thought that the U.S. and the West was so impressive and so dominant compared to the antiquated, archaic, and barbaric Chinese that over time, by osmosis, they would just become democratic. They would just become capitalist. But that didn't happen. China pursued its interests in foreign policies. Now, we still hold the keys, and the trade blockage would hurt China far more than it would hurt the U.S. And remember, Biden recalled all those U.S. experts in China working in semiconductors? And of course, Biden's too hapless to expect any kind of response. Now, even if it is part and parcel of a policy that should have been implemented a long time ago, it's still imbecilic to expect no kind of response. And we have seen Biden turn towards more of a Trump view of China and an American first policy after several months of disastrous decisions vis-a-vis China. But still, in view of the grand narrative, look at COVID. China has had zero pushback from the globe or Western governments. Meanwhile, they refuse to cooperate in any investigation of COVID origins. Now, maybe that's because the West doesn't want to know. Maybe that's because certain people in the West already know, and they don't want it getting out. But in either event, this balloon is a sizzle for media consumers and midwits on steady diets of mainstream media propaganda. This balloon doesn't actually net China anything. If you say it embarrasses the U.S., I'd say 20 of the past 23 years of U.S. policy towards China are an embarrassment. Just like this balloon transversing across the entire United States. In 2012, there was a revision to the Smith-Mundt Act. This act prevented the U.S. and its intelligence community and its deep state from propagandizing within U.S. borders or propagandizing its own people. In 2012, there was a revision to this act that allows the government to do just that. That's right. They can lie to us, they can manipulate us, and feed us crap and propaganda 24/7. So if some people think media might have changed over the past 10, 11 years, I think this is a good indication why. And the deep state and the government, they have their hooks in every big media company, including big tech. And all this whole balloon fiasco feels like a media campaign. And the CIA has its hooks in publishing companies and media companies all over the world. I mean, you can even look back to the Washington Post and its famous editor, Bill Bradley. He was an asset of the CIA and planted a lot of stories on their behalf. And we know this. I mean, this isn't controversial history here. And as far as Blinken goes and his upcoming meeting with the Chinese, Secretary Blinken needs to avoid China. They embarrass him endlessly. And until we find a half-witted replacement for that crony hack, he has no place among serious state actors exercising a determined statecraft and an unflinching focus on goals and objectives. We desperately need real statesmen in this country. We need a patriot and a visionary, with balls of steel to survive the slings and arrows of deep state conspiracies meant to destroy the most worthy among us. So, we'll find out more about this balloon over time, but right now, we need to keep our wits about us and not just trust every narrative that the news media throws at us. We're too smart for that. We're too experienced for that at this point. And a big war between the U.S. and China gets us nowhere. Even if the U.S. would like to focus on that after all their recent embarrassments in the Ukraine, in the pullout of Afghanistan, its policy in Iraq, and we're headed for another embarrassment in Syria, especially as we see Turkey and Syria, mending their relationship. So, anyway, for more, like, share, subscribe. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks.